welcome everyone to FieldVision. Today, today we are having a very special podcast, and today we have Anantaajith Raghuraman, who's joining us from London. For people who don't know, Anantaajith is working for the Athletic currently, and before that he used to work with us in the Indian Super League. He used to cover Chennai FC extensively before starting this off. So we have Anantaji and the regular gang with Sayak and Jeremy who will be joining in a bit. So let's just start. Anantaji, thank you for joining us. How are you feeling?
Hi, Ritwik. Great introduction as always. Thank you. And very glad to be joining. Excited to get this started.
Yeah. So tell us how Athletic have been doing. I mean, describe the entire journey of yours.
I mean, that could take quite a while, but I'll try to condense it a bit.
Yeah.
So, as Sayak knows, because I worked with him at Sportskeeda, I joined Sportskeeda right after my undergrad in 2021 during the second or third wave of COVID. So a lot of it was work from home, obviously. But eventually, the 22-23 ISL season is when I spent a lot of time, I think, around the stadiums, covering a lot of Chennai FC, doing a lot more of your regular journalist stuff. So going to press conferences, going to games, and we used to do all of these live blogs and all that. So, but the idea for me was always that 2 years of work, and then I'd ideally like to do my masters. So that masters was kind of in the rearview mirror all the time. And then around 2023, I decided, yeah, I will go ahead with it. So I applied to Loughborough University, who have a London campus. So came here, did my masters and while doing that, I was still working for Sportskeeda. I was also working for this other place called Total Football Analysis, which basically was my entry point into a lot of what I do right now for The Athletic. But it was basically it was a magazine every month and like website articles every week, looking very in depth at kind of tactical ideas that teams outside your top five leagues were doing. So I did a lot of stuff on the Mexican League, on the Uruguayan League, and a bunch of other places. Did that, and then while I was doing that, roughly close to the end of my masters, which is around June of last year, is when or like May of last year, is when I noticed there was an opening at the Athletic for basically just the period of the transfer window. So it was supposed to be June 1st to August 31st when the window shuts, and it was entirely focused on transfer related stuff. So they were rolling out a couple of new things, which you guys might have seen, which was one was the Athletic 500. So basically rating all the transfers, all the Premier League transfers from that window on like a fairly large scale. So you get a fairly comprehensive picture of how good the transfer is, was one. And the other was kind of like, and the other was your usual, the analysis that you see them do really, really well. So it was a lot of that. And they basically just wanted to expand their team for a bit, at least for those 3 months. And initially, this was a full-time role, which, because of my visa condition as a student in the UK, didn't really allow me to do it. So they wanted 40 hours a week. I could only do 20 because that's a visa restriction. So I applied for it. I was thinking I'm probably not going to get this because of that restriction. But ultimately, they gave me a test. I did the test, then did the interview. And both of that I thought went really well. And then eventually the offer came saying, yeah, we'll adjust, we'll do the 20 hours. And that's how I got in. Did obviously a lot to work during the transfer window, which was very busy. And I did that while I was working on my dissertation. Got done with the transfer window, and they said, we'd like to extend your part-time by another month. So that went on in September. September mid is around when I got my dissertation fully done with. Came back, and then eventually we had like a good conversation. Then October they decided keep you full time, and since October it's been a good 6-7 months, and here I am.
Very. So, what is a regular day in your life is like currently? I mean, today is Sunday, I guess, and today is there are games in the afternoon. So
Yeah.
how is your average day like?
So it really depends. Like you mentioned, so today's Sunday. I think Manchester United play today, so I'll be on kind of like on watch to see if something interesting happens in that game. But my regular day, if you're looking at a day where there are no matches, so like a weekday, it typically ends up being, because I end up doing focusing a lot more on transfers, which is when I joined. So close to the window, like we're getting close to the end of the season, windows again in a 1.5 months, we have some eyes on stuff that could potentially happen. Obviously, you see this news breaking fairly frequently on like our website and our app. So there is stuff that's kind of in the review mirror that way, but potentially a lot of it ends up being post game analysis, or like the data team, we often get together when we're in the office, get together and then kind of discuss stuff that kind of stood out to us during the weekend or during like a Champions League game, and see if that's a trend with that particular team or with that particular league, whether that's happened repeatedly. So it becomes kind of an idea, brainstorm it a bit, see if like a couple of us want to work on it together, if we're free, or if we have others are assigned, you kind of pitch it and then you do that. So that is that is most days, but then there's also regularly a lot of it is kind of keeping up with what's out there on other media websites. So it's a lot of, I listen to quite a few podcasts and go through a lot of material both on our website and on other websites. Like Opta Analyst, for example, do a lot of really good data and tactics stuff. So go through stuff like that, basically just keep updated on things like that. On days where there's a bit of a lull and all of this is fairly quiet, I think those are the days where I end up spending a lot more time on coding, like basically trying to improve what I do on coding, trying to see if there's interesting things to visualize that we aren't doing already. So that typically ends up being what a day looks like. If there are games, then it's a bit different. You either if you're assigned analysis or like helping on the briefing, which we do with a lot of these games, which go out instantly after the full-time whistle, then you kind of build towards that, see if there are specific things you want to look out for while the game's going on. So yeah, it's basically a lot of preparation, a lot of keeping up with stuff, and a lot of brainstorming. It's typically how the day ends up being. So yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
question. Anand, you talked about your master's degree in analytics. So I want to understand what do those master's degree actually teach you? What is the curriculum like? What do you learn? And what you as a journalist who has written content for an Indian website gets an
Yep.
analytics degree, how does that help you inculcate those skills you acquire in that degree and implement in football analysis? How does it work?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a question I have gotten quite a bit. So it ends up being kind of, so at least the way Loughborough course is kind of structured is a lot more. So we aren't sitting there during the course doing a lot of like coding, doing a lot of, it's a lot more very basic analysis just to get the fundamentals right, and a lot more is on data translation more than it is about data analysis or translation solely with the idea of there's a lot of these complex ideas that we see with football, right? There's all you start right from your XG or XA all the way up to really complicated stuff. The typical idea is when you know all of those metrics, you're among a rare few that knows it really well. So the idea is there's a lot of people out there who don't really understand it and you can't really stuff it down their throat. So the big idea is that we get kind of, I got taught quite a bit at Loughborough was how to represent the data in a way that it reaches more people and more people can consume it easily. So that was one of the big focuses that I took from there. And obviously, if you're a journalist, that really helps because you're catering to a really wide audience, right? And the other thing with them, they obviously we did a lot of like basic data analysis stuff, which helped, which was your Excel all the way to a little bit of fundamentals of R or Python and stuff like that, which certainly helps, especially if you're doing big data sets. But yeah, the bigger idea is always data translation, making sure you're getting your point across to people without sounding really nerdy or really like super analytical, because you'll kind of lose your reader if you do that. So it was basically learning that, and obviously as a journalist, because I'm looking at it from a journalistic angle, there were a lot of others who went in other ways. Some people were looking at it from like a sponsorship angle. Some people were looking at it from stuff very niche stuff like athlete abuse on social media, stuff like that. So there's a very wide range of places you can go to if you're doing sports analytics. So because I was looking at it with a journalistic eye, it became way easier because this is exactly what I'm trying to do even at the Athletic. It's what I was trying to do at Sportskeeda also. Is I've always had kind of an interest in numbers or in analysis, but it's getting that across that always used to be a bit of a hurdle. Because like I said, you're reaching out to an audience. Like I always think if I'm writing about something really complicated and I give it to my dad and say, read this and tell me if you understand it, there's A lot of the time after my first draft, he'll probably not, because he doesn't follow enough football to know it. And even if he does, a lot of this stuff is super complicated and it just doesn't sit well. He'll lose interest midway through. So my big point is, if there's a person who's sitting in the morning reading the newspaper and they read this article, it should ideally, most of it should be understandable. 100% may not be possible, but 75 to 80% should be easily consumable, easily understandable is the area. And a lot of that I picked up from university, because I got immediately from my undergrad into Sportskeeda. So I learned a lot on the job. I took a lot obviously from that experience and I'm very grateful for it. But I really like kind of perfected my craft while working for Total Football Analysis and working and studying my master. So the blend kind of came together more naturally that way.
Right, right. Joshi, you are up.
Yeah. So, you see football, and now going into the actual football stuff. Uh, sorry. Football has become more and more sort of data centric, as you said. So, at what point, I mean, uh, if you are someone from a football club, how do you manage? I mean, if you are following football, you have knowledge about the game. You see that player is doing good, but statistically, you see his or her performance is not into that level. So how do you balance between the scouting of your eye and the data that is present with you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this was something also that I did. I touched upon quite a bit when I did my master's dissertation, which was basically looking at kind of the role that agents or scouts play in a player's career progression. So I spoke to a lot of experts on this when I like both players, agents, couple of scouts, all of them for that. And the big thing I find is obviously what you've just mentioned, which is getting that balance, right? You see a player and you see a player in a specific setting, they're playing in a home game against a team that's not doing that well. There's a much better chance that they look really good because the quality of opponent is less, the player's playing with added motivation, let's say. So that is one aspect. But then you go back, you look at the data over a period of time, and typically our general assumption, even in life, is that over a period of time, things even out. So you get a much better picture if you're looking at somebody over 3-4 months rather than if you're looking at them over 3-4 weeks, potentially. So I think that is kind of the balance a lot of clubs are trying to strike. I don't know if a lot of them have struck it, obviously, because I've not worked inside a club. But we do see, and this is something I was really interested in, and I did a large piece on it, I think a couple of months ago for The Athletic, which is on kind of assessing how successful a transfer can be when you make the transfer. And it's despite all these advancements in data, there's so much available, video footage of players that you can watch, and you can scourge through hours and hours of footage, which I've done. You end up you still transfers still end up being a coin toss. Like a lot of it's successful about 50% or 60% of the time, maybe not even 60%, about 50 to 55% of the time, and the rest of the times it's always a bit in the gray area, or it's just doesn't work out. So you end up saying there's just it's you place a lot of emphasis on the data and on the eye test, but I think ultimately it ends up being, for clubs especially at the very highest level, it ends up being a variety of external factors, which ends up being stuff like if they're coming from a different country, how will they acclimatize to that country? If they're coming from and that adaptation alone has so many branches. It's food choices, it's whether their families are able to make the travel with them, and if there's problems with that, the player's probably not happy. Do they speak the language, or do they speak the language that's dominant in the dressing room? English club and you could have 7 Spanish players, and if the player is coming in from a different country, comes into a dressing room expecting that it'll be English, and the majority group is just a clique of Spanish players, it becomes way harder to acclimatize. But obviously we're not privy to all of these things. What we see is how they do on the Saturday or Sunday, or how they do in the midweek, how they play. So we're not privy to a lot of this stuff, and for different players it ends up being really different the way they adapt. So it is kind of getting the balance of all of those things. There is the stats, and like you said, it's become very stat oriented, because for this piece that I was talking about, I spoke to an exec, and he was telling me things like the player was playing really well for our club, but there was a drop off And then we look back at like the underlying numbers, his expected goals, his expected assists were still quite good. So we knew this player would be doing well. I think it was a loan signing, and ultimately they made it a permanent signing, and that players continued to do pretty well. So when it's like that, so they are looking a lot at the underlying numbers, but I think the bigger emphasis ends up being partially on the eye test, which you mentioned. The other thing does end up being how well they acclimatize to the surroundings. And often I think that's what dictates transfers, whether your basic your loan moves that end up becoming permanent, because most times we see, right, there's only about 30 or 40% of loan moves that clubs actually make permanent now. A lot of them get them and they do really well, or they do kind of okay-ish. Ultimately, the majority result is that they end up going back to their parent club for one reason or the other. So it's a bunch of factors, but with video and data in specific, I think, yeah, the typical trend is you look over a period of time, put them in different, you see them in different situations, and you get a much better sense of how good or how bad a player they are, rather than focusing on the eye test from like a couple of games, couple of like situations, because you can never tell, right? We can, even in our jobs, if we think we're writing something, and on that day we're not having a great day, the piece goes out. It's fairly easy to bad writer. But if we do it, if over a period of time you've had excellence, and that was just a day where you were really tired or you really had to push a deadline and you had to get it out. So it's very different. The circumstances are different. And with football, we're not privy to most of the circumstances. So it's really difficult to pass judgment, but it's also really easy to pass judgment in that you see something, it's not looking good, you instantly go to Twitter, hit a tweet out. But it's a lot more complicated than that.
Jerry, we can go next. Jeremy, is there? It's not. Right. So,
So I'll like to ask something.
yeah, go.
So, of course, since COVID, like we have seen the advent of AI in content itself. We have generative AI, we have ChatGPT, we have Gemini, we have Grok. So these
Yep.
are mainstream generative AI, and people like us who are into content, we are using it to a good extent to refine our content and everything. But how does it look from the angle of analytics, football analytics, sports analytics? How does a analytics writer like you, and also someone who might be analyst at a club who is
Yeah.
analyzing their own players, how does AI play its role for an analytics writer like you and also analysts in general?
It's a difficult question. AI, I'll confess, honestly, I've not grasped entirely how helpful or how harmful AI can be. Obviously, the only thing I have seen is there's writers who potentially use AI, and it's not that hard to not like catch it, because AI language obviously differs massively from human language. So is different. From an analytical side, I think one of the big helps you kind of do get from AI is I find, because I'm not an expert coder, but when I'm coding, I often run into roadblocks, and I end up, you always back yourself to kind of figure out the solution, right? So I keep going, try different things in the code. Most of the time, it doesn't work out. Ultimately, I end up going to like Copilot or ChatGPT or somewhere, and I just type in and say, how do I resolve this? And most of the time, it gives me at least a solution from which I can work on. If it's not the proper solution, at least gives me a reasonable enough solution that I can implement for the short term at least, and then figure it out as I learn more. So it does make that process much easier, because otherwise I'd imagine you either go on like Reddit or something, or you go to YouTube, go to a tutorial, go through all of that. AI gives you the answer fairly quickly, and that is, from my experience, that is the extent to which I've used AI. So like I said, I don't think I fully grasped how helpful it potentially could be for analytics. From a club angle, I'd again, I'm not entirely sure, but I'd usually assume there is a bit of use, but most of these clubs already have really advanced algorithms, because we usually see the data analysts, or we hear about the data analysts, but they usually also have data engineers. So there's guys who are sitting and putting these workflows and these type of systems in place that help them analyze players, help them analyze potential players that they're going to sign, and stuff like that. So I would imagine there is some degree of AI involved, but obviously I can't say with much conviction how exactly it would work.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, Jeremy, you can go ahead now.
Do you think fans and analysts overview certain stats while ignoring the main or the key stats in data analytics? or in football?
You're about overvaluing certain stats.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
obviously.
yeah, I think that is it is a bit of a problem because we end up seeing with data. I think the big thing is it kind of arms people to make arguments they want much more easily. Necessarily an analyst or a data expert. There are things you can kind of pick up because there's so much open source data. You can kind of pick off of like take it and run off on a tangent from that. And I think a lot of social media discourse ends up being that. So there's people who do really good job with data, but there's also a lot who use data to support preconceived notions of what they think they really want to depict, which is a problem, right? It's something people are trying to crack down on, but it's obviously very difficult given the nature of social media. So in terms of overvaluing stats, I think that is true. And for a big degree, I think I've done it as a journalist. So there's things I've seen. Obviously, for me, I usually go by the eye test first before I go to data. So if I'm going by the eye test and there's something I see, I really go after data that proves it, even if it's not there. And it's something I used to do very actively in my early months at the Athletic. And a lot of my seniors and my editors had to say, if it's not there, it's not there. Go by the eye test. And that's again, it goes back to the point I was saying, which was even without the data, you should be able to make a compelling argument if you think that's a consistent enough thing. And again, you have to observe it over a period of time, which is when all of these things kind of even out. If you've seen it in 2 games in a row, it's not really a pattern. If you've seen it in 7 out of 10 games, then it's a pattern. Is the kind of thinking. So there is a tendency to kind of overvalue stats a little easily. I assume for me a big one is always XG because it's the easiest thing that's available. It's fairly easily comprehensible, though it's actually quite complicated. There's so many things that factor in.
Yeah, I have very big question here because
Yeah,
see, I am a writer, okay, but I'm a fan as well. And you
yeah,
said XG is everywhere these days. Every single person is talking about XG. So I want to understand from your point of view, how does XG work?
yeah,
How is it calculated? And
yeah.
what are the implications of XG on the football game itself? Just walk me through like I don't know anything.
So with XG, I think the big thing is the first thing to understand with XG is I always see it kind of like the umpire's call in cricket. So you always kind of it's made with the idea of giving it a margin of error is the big thing. So it is not 100% accurate, and most of the time it's not. It's like because we also see XG from so many different places that XGs, each company has a different way of calculating it end of the day. But some of the basic factors that end up mattering is obviously the location from which you take the shot is a big one. How many defenders are around you? So are they in with the chance of being able to block it? Obviously, you can't play this out in real life. If the defender's not blocked it, he's not blocked it. It's done. But is he in with a chance of blocking it? So is he in close proximity? Where the goalkeeper is positioned? And how far away from the goal you're shooting. So obviously a shot from 30 yards out is going to average like an XG of 0.06, 0.07. But from 2 yards out, like if you saw the Rafinha goal in midweek, for example, last week against Dortmund, that would probably be at like 0.9596. But it's even then it's really hard to find a goal that has 1 XG. Like there is no certainty of scoring because there's you can always mess up somewhere. Like right from the goal line, you can hit it right across the goal and not score. So it's basically factoring in for all of those probabilities before it gives you a number, which is why XG is always a bit of a complicated stat to really make well-reasoned arguments with. And from a club point of view, I can see that it matters to a degree, but I'm fairly certain they have way more, way better metrics to quantify whether a player is doing well or not. But yeah, XG in particular is really like sometimes it really ticks me off the amount I see XG on Twitter because some people take it to be representative of how the game went. It may not really be. Like you can quantify, you can make 3, 4 really good chances, and because of that, your XG will be really high. You could have a penalty which has an XG of 0.7, regardless of what the situation is. You could have, which is another thing, right? You could have a player who's missed 7 of his last 10 penalties. His XG from his 11th penalty will still be 0.7. But would you really back him to score? Probably not, right? So XG is made keeping in mind margin of error. But if you use it as kind of the concrete argument on which you're making your entire like statement or justification, it probably doesn't work as well. It's the big thing with XG. Yeah.
Uh, just a moment,
Thank you.
just a moment. No, the time is going off. We can just after this we can just join the same link and we'll continue from it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So now about transfers, the
Mm.
favorite part. Uh, you see, the financial muscle of the Premier League teams. Uh, City has not had a good season per se.
Mm.
Uh, Arsenal probably did not invest much last year.
Yeah.
United probably doesn't have the budget. So, so what? I mean, before the end of the season, how do you see the transfer market panning out for the Premier League clubs, at least the top six, top seven clubs, including
Yeah.
Newcastle?
So again, transfer is always interesting, and obviously I don't have any insider information. But from what I get is that most of these clubs will be fairly active, because I think the big thing we've kind of figured from this season, because it's been a bit of a weird season also. In some ways, it's been good because you have a lot of these unexpected clubs like Bournemouth, Brighton, all of these guys fighting for Champions League slots, which is fantastic. But for the big six specifically, because we were focusing on them, obviously it's been a bit of a weird season, except for maybe Liverpool, who've been fantastic throughout the season. But with Arsenal, for example, I think, and we've reported on this, I think, fairly recently, is that a striker is fairly high on their list, and they will go after a striker, which is, I think, it's been obvious to anybody who's seen them this season that they do it. For me, though, I've always thought, and this is through the season, they're also really lacking a creator of the same kind of potential of Saka or Odegaard. And obviously, this is very difficult to get in this market because Saka and Odegaard are really good players, and there's nobody who's going to come in and say I will be a backup for one of these two and still play really well. So I think, like, even if you see across numbers across the season, their creativity metrics have also dropped off quite a bit. So they do need another creator, is my big opinion. With the other teams, City have obviously already entered a rebuild, and they lose De Bruyne in the summer. They've kind of got the structure around which they've had for ages. So I usually back them to have a good transfer window again. But I think fullback is potentially one area where they might change it. Obviously Walker's probably going to leave, I'd imagine, down to that they've loaned him out. Left back's been an issue, I think, for them since Guardiola took over, because he's had Delph there, then he's had uh, Mendy, who's now not at the club, and he's just done a lot of like fitting over there. I'd imagine they'd go after a proper left back this window. With the others, Spurs, I think the big thing's always been squad depth. So squad depth is probably the big one. They have a lot of good players, but they don't have potentially enough game changes, is the
Yeah,
thing.
I'll just interrupt.
Yeah,
Interrupt here. But
yeah,
Spurs, you say you probably don't. I mean, summer's coming, and we might possibly see a change in guard as well. With whatever's happening with Postecoglou. Depends
yeah.
on how they play Europe. But yes, how does that change of coach
Yeah.
makes any makes
It
changes
will,
in
I
the
think.
transfer?
Yeah, I think it will. Like, ultimately, you end up, like, for example, Spurs, the guys they have now, who Ankur, Kulusevski, Romero, were all players signed from Italy, potentially for Antonio Conte. Still doing really well. They're all great players, so they've done really well under Postecoglou also. But you'd imagine any manager that comes in, especially to a team that's probably not delivered on expectations, like Spurs will probably finish. Maybe they won't finish in the bottom half, but that's where they are right now. So they will have to make transfers, and they will potentially do it. A different manager comes in, he will have players that he wants to get. So that does end up having a bit of an influence. How big the influence will be depends on how much money Spurs have to spend in this summer, which obviously we're not privy to. Um, and it's the same. I don't think any of the other clubs will undergo a manager change. Obviously, United have already changed from Ten Hag to Amorim, um, which is one thing. But potentially he could want players that he wants to get in. We've obviously seen, I think this week, one of our guys has reported that they're interested in both Cunha and Delap, who'd both be kind of interesting signings for United's current system and the problems they have with scoring goals. Um, but yeah, you'd say they'd buy more players suited to Amram's system. So potentially we're looking at wing backs and more of these number 10s that he wants, the way he wants them to play really close to the goalkeeper. So those two are big ones. As with the other clubs, I think Liverpool, without knowing it, probably need to go through a decent bit of rebuilding. I think left backs become a problem area now. And that's why they've repeatedly been linked with Milos Kerkez from Bournemouth, who I think is fantastic. And right back, obviously, Trent is gone now. They have Conor Bradley, but probably need a backup right back also because they have no alternative. I think centre backs Joe Gomez and Konate are really good, but they're also really injury prone. So centre back is potentially another one. And lastly, they maybe need a goal scoring forward also if they sell Darwin Núñez. So Liverpool might have a lot to do. And if you remember, they made no signings last summer. So potentially now to get more players, Liverpool might have a big window despite winning the league, which is a fantastic achievement. And who's the last? Chelsea's the last. I never know what to do with Chelsea. They've already made two signings for the summer, which is quite mad. Also more youngsters, but I think again with them also striker is key. But the striker market's a really difficult market to shop at. And who's the left? I think Newcastle's left. I think Newcastle will keep hold of Isaac because obviously, from whatever we've read being reported, they need to pay. Any club that wants to buy him needs to pay a massive amount. So Newcastle is, I think, that is potentially their big problem sorted. But again, even they might have to go after depth on the wing potentially because I think obviously their left wing is sorted. They have Anthony Gordon and Harvey Barnes, who are both really good footballers. On the right, Jacob Murphy's had a fabulous season, but they don't really have a backup to Murphy in case he gets injured or in case his form kind of drops off next year. So potentially, right wing might be one place we see. They also sold Miguel Almiron in January, so they don't really have much depth there. But yeah, otherwise, I think Newcastle's a very well constructed team. Their fullbacks are great. I love Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall. And obviously, centre backs, Dan Burn, Sven Botman, all great players. So again, Newcastle, I think, is also a fairly settled team, which really helps. Yep.
Jeremy, go on. Jeremy.
Yeah. So, do you think now, how do you think data analytics has changed the way we define value in a player beyond just goals, assists, or points? Just the on-field rather than on-field performances. How you see that?
Yeah, I mean, now it is like kind of it is a big role in how you end up valuing a player because you're looking at how much they're contributing on the field, which ends up being what you're mostly judged on, which is whether you're scoring, whether you're assisting, or helping keep clean sheets, you're working hard enough off the ball. All of these things really matter. Um, at the same time, I think now value has also gone on to kind of include, can you make a profit on this player, which is because of PSR and stuff like that. You need more, like you need some kind of return on investment. Obviously, if you've paid 60 million, let's say, for a player, and for 3 years you've had him, so that is 60% of that contract up, and so that's 36 million is basically accounted for, but you still have 24 million left over the next 2 years because that's how amortization works. So you've got 60 million, 5 year contract is basically 12 million a year. So if you've bought him for 60 million, had him for 3 years, and then you've got the 24 million left, and you're able to sell the player for about 30 million, let's say, you've still made a reasonable profit on that player. So that kind of stuff really matters now. And which is why it's become such, like Saudi Arabia being able to spend money, that's why it's blown up so much. It's because you can potentially get massive transfer fees even for players you haven't paid that much for. John Duran's a great example. I think Villa got him for fairly cheap compared to how much they got for him when he went to Saudi. So in terms of value, yeah, I think the financial value obviously still matters, maybe matters to a higher degree now because of PSR, financial fair play, and all of that. But data-wise, a lot of this stuff does matter. When I spoke to an exec for one of the pieces I wrote, right? And for that, and he was really specific on that. And like they do look at a lot of these metrics when they're trying to figure out whether a player is working out or not. But at the same time, it's also, like I mentioned, the bunch of off-field stuff. If all of that still looks good, and the player's underlying numbers are good, but it's not really translating on the field in terms of goals and assists, I think there is still some more patience with the player. The idea is that the player is still putting in all the effort, is still doing really well. It's just not come in the form of goals or assists yet. The belief will be that if they keep going on the same track, they will eventually get there. So there is still that kind of belief. But yeah, that is, I think, roughly how it's become a key point of like valuing players.
Yeah, you spoke about the PSR thing, and we just
Yep.
go to Manchester United.
Hmm.
You all know that the situation there is not so great from a financial perspective, but just
Hmm.
the on-field perspective, right? The financial perspective. So there are things that United might go for players who are probably forces cheap and maybe cheap and young as you last week
Hmm.
we read about India and then
Yeah.
India again. Sorry, Delap again. Young player and it probably will come for cheap if Ipswich go down, which is very likely.
Hmm.
So, how do you, as a correspondent who's covering United, how do you view it?
Yeah. So I would say I don't cover United in particular, but it is a lot more. I do end up doing a lot of United stuff just because there's always news around United. But I would think, like I said, the focus is kind of getting players more suited to the system. But with United, like you said, they do have kind of financial stuff to sort out. So I'd always assume their big thing, and this is something we reported with the Delap and Cunha stuff as well, is that the big thing is that they probably need to sell first because before they can spend a lot of money. Because you spoke about Delap potentially his transfer fee reducing. It could, but Delap will potentially be expensive, one, and the other thing is there's so many other clubs that are interested in Leon Delap because he's that good. And like I said, the striker market's really a tough market to shop at. um so yeah, with United, obviously they'll probably lose a couple of players in the summer. I think Lindelof and Eriksen's contracts are up, for example, so they're probably leaving, which is wages off the bill. But they'll still need to make sales. Whether they can sell, for example, Rashford now who's at Villa, whether they can sell Rashford, whether they can sell other players who potentially Amorim thinks doesn't fit his system really well. All of that is tough to see at this point. It's tough to determine immediately and might depend a lot on whether United, like Spurs, win the Europa League because they'll then have Champions League football. From the league, it's probably difficult to get it because they're 13th. Um, but yeah, it will kind of be dependent on those factors. But I do think they'll probably have to sell before they buy. That's the big thing.
Right. Jeremy, you have any questions?
And
No. Okay. So I'll just go right behind. So so anyone who's coming, you've been in India, you covered football in India, and now you're covering the Premier League. So what sort of advice would you give to young journalists? For example, Jeremy here, who does the tactical pieces for us. So people
Hmm.
like him who wishes to be part of these big organizations. So what
Yeah.
would your advice be to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you're getting a lot of this stuff out. I think the big thing I've discovered, and I discovered this quite late, to be fair to me. I discovered it only after I got into total football analysis, is that you need your work out there on a platform. And you need, for example, now, if you're doing that for FieldVision, that's fantastic. So if you're doing that, the other thing I would say is, apart from getting it out on a platform, is also actively using something like LinkedIn, which I discovered was professionally, at least, it ends up being such a big thing, big part of how occupations in general. Sports is one thing, but just every occupation here hinges a lot more on your use of LinkedIn. And because there's LinkedIn is the easiest way to connect with people who are in this field. So I would say if you're writing these pieces, definitely get them out on put them on LinkedIn, post them. It may not get a lot of reactions. You might maybe there's only like a one like and a comment or something like that, but it could potentially lead to someone of relevance seeing it. And that'll always and you'll it's I treat LinkedIn kind of like an active resume. So it's just constantly evolving because you're always updating the stuff that you're doing. So my big piece of advice would always be that constantly have your work put out on LinkedIn, engage with people who are putting out similar work, kind of build your network around big enough that you have people, even if those people can't offer you a job, you have people who you can go to for advice. And ultimately that always helps because you're trying to reach into the kind of territory that's not that easy. It's very competitive. And because you guys have been in Indian football, you know there's so many people who are really interested in covering Indian sports, and it's the same anywhere across the world, especially with football because it's so global. Like it's big in almost every major country. Um, so if it's super competitive, you need some point of differentiation. I always end up thinking it is those guys who really put themselves out there on LinkedIn. It's also people who are actively speaking with others, getting that advice that helps, and kind of yeah, it's a lot of networking, a lot of publicizing your own work is really, I think, really crucial to kind of crack it upwards in this field.
Yeah, Jeremy had some questions. He just texted me. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jeremy.
go for it, go for it.
One question is like, can we actually evaluate? I mean, can we actually rely on data every time? So like there are probabilities, right? Like a top player or a flop player can go the other end, or the exact the poles opposite. So can we actually fully say that data is reliable at every cases?
That is a great question. I think the big thing is always using data as a supporter for your argument, never using it as the basis. So, like you said, there's a player who probably doesn't do too well at one club, goes to another club, instantly looks much better. There's a lot of factors apart from data that are at play there also, because it ends up being, like I said, it ends up being acclimatization, adapting, and a bunch of this stuff. And even with data, like I said, data never gives you the full picture, and it's like I said, it's always good as a supporter, never entirely good as kind of the basis for your argument. And that ends up being how like players in one situation, lot of pressure, simply go to another situation. A lot of the stuff could be same. The minor changes could be maybe they're playing in a system that suits them better, or it could be less pressure, or it could simply be they're out of the public eye a bit and they've kind of got the chance. And you really want to impress a new club, so you have this initially you have this really good stretch of performances, but like I said, my belief is always that over time things always even out. You can have a few ups and downs in the initial weeks, months, maybe potentially could even last a year, but at the end of the day, things always even out. And when they even out is when you have a much clearer picture of whether something like that is more data influenced or it's more personality influenced or something else entirely. So it's always looking at data, even looking at data over a period of time rather than player was bad for 2 years, suddenly really good for 1 year. So the player is a really good player. Probably not. It's more they're a decent player who had 2 bad years and are now playing much higher than expectations. Eventually, the expectation has to be that they're a decent player. It shouldn't be that they're too good, shouldn't be that they're too bad.
Thank you.
Anand, that's a lot of information. It's fantastic. Like we're learning a lot from you. So, I'm asking from fan perspective now. I'm a
Yep.
Barcelona fan, you probably know.
Mm,
This season Barca has been doing really good, and
mm,
they are on an upward curve. So, how you, journalist who is into data and tactics, how different is Flick's Barcelona
mm.
from the Barca sides of from yesteryears? And
Yeah.
since as you said you are into transfers and you focus on the Premier League, but also I want to know what kind
Yeah.
of additions should the team do in the next
Mm,
window to
yeah.
build on the momentum they have
Mm.
gained over the last few months. So,
So firstly, the question on differences.
hmm,
So this is something I touched upon very recently. I think after the Dortmund game is that the big thing that Barca have kind of changed. I think is that they've become a much more, to reference one of my colleagues, they've become a much more complete team, I think, under Flick. Because and the reason why I'm saying that is under Enrique or under Pep, which are obviously the best teams we've seen recently. The big thing always used to be that their key was we keep possession, we keep passing it around till we find that little gap, and we have the quality of players to exploit that gap, score a goal, and keep doing that over and over in repetitive patterns till we basically kill the game off. And if they didn't have the ball, there was immediately like we are immediately going to go get it, press really high, do whatever. With Flick, it's a bit different in that he's not really reliant on chains and chains of passing. For him, if he sees, and a big example I always go back to is the Bayern game when they won 4-1 in the Champions League this season, is that he is very comfortable with the team going long, beating the press by just going over the defense or going like 2-3 passes into the main attacker and into a good area to get the goal. Like for him, this team can also score those passing moves. I'd imagine like one big example for me is always the goal they scored against Young Boys. If you saw the first goal, where they basically just kept passing, moving. It's a very, very Barca goal in that there's so many passes, so much off the ball movement. But then, like I said, the Bayern game's a big reference point for they can literally just do the simple thing, go over the top and score. And people are obviously not going to be worried as long as the team's winning games. And I think that is a more effective use of the like the profile of players Barca have now. There's not so many technicians. There are obviously a few, like Pedri and De Jong are fantastic, but they're not. He doesn't have a Messi, firstly, which is a big difference. But the other thing is also he doesn't have players who are entirely reliant on how good they are on the ball. Like Lewandowski's not got Suarez's say link up play and stuff. But what's Lewandowski really good at? He's good at finding spaces, getting into those spaces, and he's good at getting shots away and scoring. So this is really what Flick's basically done is just maximize the capabilities of these players and brought a system where they can mix it up really well, which keeps opponents kind of on the back foot all the time. In terms of transfers, I'd say for them now, I think there is news that Balde is potentially injured, and that is one area I've always thought like fullbacks is an area where they've had like Kunde and Balde are excellent first choice players, but their backups are obviously academy guys, Martin and Ford, who are both very young, still kind of learning their trade. And this is a problem Barca have had in the past, right? When they had Jordi Alba, they've had backups from the academy come, but this is a really tasking role, what he's asking his fullbacks to do. So potentially fullback is one. And they're obviously going to lose. I don't know if they'd renew Martinez again. They're obviously renewing him for another year. So a left-footed centre-back is, I think, really crucial to how Flick plays. The other big one might be, I think, a Lewandowski backup at some point. He has to plan for it. Torres is great. I really like Ferran Torres, but I don't know if he can do what Lewandowski does, which is score 40 goals a season. I think Torres is probably a 20 to 25 goal across competition striker. He's not a 40, 45 goal striker. So that is, they either get another forward who can also score 20 goals. So you've basically sorted that problem out with two people instead of just Torres. Or yeah, you find a proper replacement, which again, this is becoming a theme, right? So many teams need a striker. There are only a limited number of elite strikers in the world. That's why it's such a difficult market. And obviously Barca have massive financial restrictions. So we'll see how if they win competitions, I think that payout really helps, which is why something like the Super Cup, which is not that relevant, the fact that they won it is still useful. And the same goes because they're fighting on three fronts. I think La Liga or the Champions League winning that would be a big boost for them.
One more before Doshi comes in. So, of course, we have talked about how you have gone from Indian sports media, football media to getting a degree and working with athletic. You have also have a tactical football analyst a role there. How would you recommend how would you recommend a young writer who only focuses on the storyline part of football, like matches are happening, like they're
Yeah.
writing stories, they're writing interviews. How would you suggest someone like that, a young journalist, to go into the data side of things without a degree? Like, of course,
Mm.
degree is there, but without a degree, how would you recommend a young journalist
Yeah.
to go from storytelling to hardcore analysis, data analysis?
Yeah. Great question again. I think the key starting point is always that we have so many people who are doing a really good job in this field. Like for me, I still think I'm actively still learning a lot of this stuff. So I'm clearly not an expert on a lot of this because I find out there's a lot of things I do in my job. I feel I've done a really good job and maybe I have, but then I read some of my colleagues and I see this is the depth of analysis we could go to. And obviously there's like evolving tactical ideas all the time. So data analysis is never, I don't think at least for the next 10, 15 years is going to go out of fashion. If anything, it's going to get more complicated, more interesting. So the big starting point would always be reading the work of others. I think Twitter has some fantastic people. One of them is Alex Barker, I think at Euro Expert, also works for the Athletic on the video team. He does brilliant work on this front. And he's someone I actively learn a lot from. But the first step's always, I think, reading, engaging with a lot of these things. And the second is really, I think I picked up a lot of it just picking up those what I've learned from those readings and then seeing if I can spot it in games. So if I've seen him notice something, just go back, either watch the game again or most times just watch the live game with an idea of seeing what is specific player doing. And the big thing I did was even initially when I started it, I always focused on the holding midfielder. So the number 6 is, for example, if I'm watching Arsenal, I very specifically focused on Rice. If I'm watching City, I very specifically focused on Rodri because you end up, when you see the number 6, you can basically see how the rest of the team is structured around them. And you get a much better idea of how that works. And that was kind of my entry into tactical analysis. Once I did that, then it became much easier to see what the movements each of the other players were doing. So I find you see how they play, and then yeah, basically you see something, you read something, you pick up something from it, and then see how it plays out in a game is I think the best entry point into into how some of this stuff works, and then it's actively trying to employ that into your writing. So you have a blog or something and you do it, you use, so there's more complicated resources for video analysis, but the easiest one is YouTube. A lot of these teams do end up putting extended highlights that are like 20 minutes. Some teams, some websites upload the entire game. So it is doing stuff like that. It's going through the game, going through like reading people who write a lot more of this and who do this consistently. And I think that is kind of the best entry point. And then once you start doing it, you'll realize you'll start picking up on things really quickly. So that would be the best way, I think.
Before we end up, last question. This is again related to United. We know, as you said, and we've read that United needs to sell players, need to sell players. But what are the things they have done? I mean, not as per your knowledge, but what do you see when I see you writing about them, United on from possibly every game for the last week or so, past months on. So if you look at the goals aren't coming from Holland, the defense, you don't know about the Luke Shaw situation. He has the contract, but possibly again Dallo, possibly because he's the only one who's operating from the right hand side. So what happens to him? So what is your general idea what United should target in the upcoming window?
All right. So in the window, I think United is a very, very interesting case as a journalist, just because they've got to kind of make signings, but we obviously don't know how much or how many signings they'll be able to make. If they had to prioritize, I'd say like wing backs, like you mentioned, is one, which is why I think they were kind of linked with Giovanni Quenda, who ended up going to Chelsea. They do need, just on the basis of profile, I think they need more athletic players. Athletic in the sense that they need players who can kind of shrug others off the ball, which is why I don't mind signings like Ugarte or Dilic, because they are fairly physical players who are willing to kind of get into the kind of the crux of the battle and kind of go like get into the back of players, win the ball back, which is why I don't mind players like that. But they also need, I think, much quicker players, which they kind of showed when they signed Patrick Dogo in January, or Aiden Heaven from Arsenal. It's just players who are quicker, more dynamic, and positionally. So now I think the left wing back is Dorgus for the foreseeable future. It'll be between Dorgu and Shaw, I'd imagine, when Shaw's back fit. Right wing back, like you said, is a bit complicated. I think Dallo's done enough, Justin, that he's consistently available. He doesn't get injured very often. And he just looks a bit overworked at this point because he's playing basically every minute for United and he's playing for Portugal. I think he probably needs a rest. And if you give him a rest, he's a good enough player to be playing for United week in, week out. But right wing back, potentially, I think right now he still has to, if Dallo's injured, he has Mazraoui, who's much more defensive. Dallo's also kind of defensive. So whether they can do that, but I don't think that is a priority, which is where I think what we're hearing is more on striker or number 10s, because the right number 10, I think Ahmad is fantastic. The left number 10, you're kind of switching around between Bruno and Zirkzee and Garnacho, and none of it's clicking, mainly because Bruno's really good, but he also has to help with other things in this team. Which is why I think somebody like Cunha could be really helpful for that role if they end up signing him. And probably the other striker is, I think, still a big one. But again, like we said, really difficult market, really few elite strikers that are on the market anyway. So whether they'll be able to get somebody, even Delap across, or somebody else, if Delap doesn't work out, is kind of a question mark. And if they're losing Eriksen, that's basically another midfielder gone. So in the last two windows, they've lost both McTominay and Eriksen. And they've not really replaced either of them. So an athletic midfielder is potentially another thing that should be on the chart. So there's just, and then now after the Lyon game, there will be people saying they need to change their goalkeeper also. So you're basically talking about like 7 or 8 new signings. And it's really difficult to do that unless you're Chelsea, effectively. So they're in a bit of a complicated situation, I'd say, and they probably have to do this over 3-4 windows. I don't think they'd be able to do it in this summer alone. But if they had to really prioritize, I'd imagine the number 10 is probably one, and the other might be kind of if he believes that Shaw is not going to be fit enough, or Shaw doesn't fit a system, potentially a left wing back. But I think priority is probably going to be striker and number 10, because the first thing we've heard is that Delap and Cunha are linked with them. So that might be the big priority. Maybe not wing backs immediately, because I think he can kind of manage for now. It's not ideal, but I think he can kind of manage it till they find a good enough prospect that can immediately fit in.
Brilliant. Thank you so very much, Anantaajith. Thanks for your time. We've already passed the 1 hour mark.
No worries.
So thank you so very much. We look forward to meeting you again possibly in the future. Thank you for joining. And yes, Saif, Jeremy, closing remarks.
Yeah, fantastic, insightful conversation. Sanjeev, it's a privilege to talk with you, because we are like,
glad to speak with you guys.
this channel, like our channel mostly focuses on storylines, but it's very nice to have someone with so much data points to present to audience.
Yeah.
So it's really helpful for me personally. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.
Jeremy,
Yeah, as what Ritesh Bhai and Sai Bhai said, as an aspiring guy working with data and numbers, it was great to meet you. Anantaajith Bhai, because studying and learning and all. So hopefully we could connect in future in person and with FieldVision again. That's for all the works learned.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. So glad to be here.
For example, he's just 17 and he's doing all the technical and data. Just 17.
That's fantastic. That's brilliant. Like I said, I didn't get into a lot of it before I was 22 or 23. So you're well on track. So all the best. Keep going.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Bye. Thank you.